Forgiveness is a lifeline. It's a life-saving gift. It saves the life of a relationship that could easily die if that lifeline isn't extended. And it has for sure saved our marriage countless times.
Yeah.
And it's our strong belief that not a single marriage on this planet can survive without generous helpings of it. Forgiveness. That's what we're talking about today on the Anything Together podcast.
A marriage is made up of two very individual and flawed human beings. The Bible tells us in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So in our very nature, we're flawed. And that means we'll eventually sin against our wife and our husband, and we'll fail to meet their needs. And this is exactly what makes forgiveness such a vital part of any lasting marriage. In fact, and this may be stating the obvious, but we believe there's no marriage that can last without it.
Right, and we know that from firsthand experience. This is such a prevalent need in a marriage relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You might be going through a tough time in your marriage right now, or maybe you just came out of a tough time and forgiveness totally saved your marriage. Maybe right now you're praying that you will be forgiven, or you're wondering if you'll ever be able to forgive. We hope and we've prayed that this conversation will be exactly what you need to hear right now.
Yes, and this is such a common topic that everyone watching and listening can relate to it. And I want to encourage you, though, while forgiveness is often thought of with the more significant hurtful issues that can happen, you have to carefully examine the way you handle even the most insignificant bickering or arguing with your spouse. Though many of us would consider ourselves to be forgivers, you might be surprised to find that sometimes we delay forgiving in order to prove that we're right or to continue the debate. When you look at the definition of forgiveness, it really means a couple of different things. Choosing not to feel resentment any longer toward the person who offended you, and granting that person a pardon. It's a lot like when a prisoner is granted a pardon by a prison warden. They're set free from the charges that were brought against them, and then they're released. We essentially set our spouses free from the charges brought against them when we forgive them.
Right. And that isn't to say that you weren't hurt or that your feelings aren't valid. It just means that you're choosing your spouse and your marriage over what happened, and you're letting it go so you can both move on and your marriage can be resolved. A while back, we put a question on our Instagram. What is the number one secret to a long-lasting marriage? And the answer we got more than any of the others was forgiveness. And you may be thinking, what about love? I thought love was what holds a marriage together. Well, yes, love is the foundation of a good marriage, but you can't have a healthy love relationship without forgiveness. And it's just about impossible to forgive without love.
Yeah.
They just go hand in hand. And it's forgiveness that sets us free and breathes life back into a marriage.
There was a time in our past when we both might agree that our marriage had a near-death experience. It didn't happen all at once or all of a sudden. It was a slow fade, and it brought us to a point where we didn't even know if we would survive. We had hurt each other. We had taken each other for granted. We were both deeply hurt, and we both needed forgiveness. Our relationship was in desperate need of healing, and it was a life and death situation.
So we talked a lot. We loved each other. We didn't want a divorce, but we also didn't know if we'd be able to survive our circumstances. We spent day after day talking and praying, and we even decided to have lunch together every single day. While we were away from each other during the day, we would send emails and texts and just express our love and also our sadness over the condition that our marriage was in. And we would just assure each other of our commitment and forgiveness for each other. But it was going to take the kind of forgiveness that doesn't look back at the offenses, but looks forward at the healing.
That's right. We each had to decide that the sin was not going to define who our spouse was and that our love was worth fighting for. We didn't want to live without each other, and we were committed to making it work. We knew that forgiveness was the only way forward because divorce was not an option for us.
Yeah.
I remember us talking a lot about the hard work it would take to get us back on track. We agreed to kill the complacency and not fall back into the old lazy habits and careless ways of handling our relationship. We really fought for our marriage.
About a month or so ago, our pastor was preaching on Ephesians 2, and a certain piece of it really stuck with me as we were planning to write this podcast. It's Ephesians 2, verses 4 and 5. And it's talking about how when we were dead in our sin, giving in to our own selfish desires, how God changed us and made us alive with Him. It says, "But God, who is rich in mercy because of His great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace, you have been saved." And I thought when I heard this that if the God of the universe can extend that lifeline, being so generous with grace, forgiving us, who are we to hold a grudge or to harbor unforgiveness?
But you may be thinking, but I'm deeply hurt and I don't know how I can forgive my wife or my husband. And we can both sympathize with that. It's a very difficult position to be in. But you should know that the path away from forgiveness is dark and painful. And we just want to point you in the right direction. Choosing not to forgive can be really harmful both to you and to your marriage. Holding a grudge breeds anger, bitterness, and resentment, and it makes it impossible for healing to occur. 1 Corinthians 13 tells us, love is patient, love is kind. It doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud. It doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. So already we can find in the Bible that withholding forgiveness is moving in the wrong direction. But what's even worse is that choosing not to forgive puts you in a sinful position with God. The Bible's very clear on this. Mark 11, verse 25 says, "And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." Forgiving those who have wronged you is not optional according to God. It's required. So no matter what happens going forward, make the decision to forgive. Your marriage and your own spiritual condition depend on it. And so we'd like to share a few things we've learned through our own journey and offer a few steps you could take to help you work through forgiveness as a couple. The first thing we want to suggest is to pray.
Mm.
Pray for God to heal your broken heart. Pray that He would heal your marriage and give you the ability to forgive your spouse.
And the next thing would be to acknowledge the hurt. If you're the one who's hurt, it's important to communicate that. If you're the offender, it's necessary to take responsibility for it by confessing and sincerely apologizing. The offense has to be out in the open in order to deal with it. And communication of these things is so critical. Our hope is that you'll forgive each other and work toward reconciliation, and that just can't happen without this step.
The next thing is something that's really helped me a lot. It's helped me see LeAnn's feelings more clearly, and it's helped us to avoid the need for forgiveness in the first place. I'm talking about practicing empathy. When we first got married, I was still dealing with a lot of my own emotional challenges from my previous marriage. I brought some real baggage with me. And unfortunately, because of that baggage, I was pretty self-centered in the beginning. Well, it was more like the first several years of our marriage, right? But I often failed to recognize what did or didn't hurt LeAnn's feelings. Over time, I've gotten much better at this. But if you practice empathy, you open yourself up to a much wider perception of your spouse's feelings. It makes you more emotionally intelligent. And trust me, while it's not always the husbands who are the culprits in this, you guys need to understand and know that this is something every wife will value. Working on your own level of empathy is a good thing to do to avoid unnecessary moments of careless words and of hurting your spouse's feelings.
Our next suggestion is to consider seeking wise counsel. This could be a professional Christian counselor, or it could be an objective Christian friend, but preferably someone who has some life experience and some real wisdom in the area of forgiveness, but also someone who can encourage you through the process. And you'll want to use careful discretion here regarding how much and what specifically you choose to share. Because while you want to be open and truthful, you want to be careful not to attack the character of your spouse. So just remember to be respectful of each other while you're also working through the details of that situation.
That's good.
At our church, we have marriage mentors. Your church may have something similar, or maybe they have a list of Christian counselors that they can recommend.
Another important thing we did, and this really piggybacks off of what we said earlier about acknowledging hurt, but we established an open line of communication, an honest dialogue. And we deliberately spent more time together to discuss how we were going to proceed out of that really difficult place we were in, because that's what we wanted, a way forward. And hopefully, if you're in a tough place in your marriage, that's what you want too. But we were really deliberate in this phase to express our love for each other a lot. When you're in a time like that, you're solving problems and resolving hurt feelings, but you're also trying to find your bond again.
Mhm.
So that loving expression, that reassurance, that affirmation throughout that time was really important for us.
Yeah. And another thing that we did to cultivate forgiveness and restoration was to commit to courting each other again.
Mm.
We went on regular weekly dates. In fact, we wrote an article and recorded a podcast that's all about the importance of dating, and it gives some good ideas too if you want to check that out. But dates can be really just any designated time that are spending together. You can go to a bookstore or go get ice cream, go get coffee. Even running errands together can be fun ish. But it doesn't have to cost a lot of money or be a fancy dinner date. Find some things that you both enjoy doing and do them together. You can't imagine how effective dating your spouse is in bringing romance and intimacy back to life.
Yes. And speaking of intimacy, as you forgive each other, you both need to push yourselves to become sexually intimate again. There are several really important physical and spiritual benefits that come from that God given connection.
Mm.
God supernaturally strengthens the bond of a husband and wife through their intimacy, and the two of you become one again, just as God designed you to be. And that causes everything else you're facing to become easier because your unity has been restored.
These were some of the things we did that made a real difference for us when we faced those bigger issues that threatened the life of our marriage. But we should also recognize the little daily irritating things that we do
Mm.
that can be offensive and cause division. A sarcastic or rude tone of voice, a little careless insult, or a selfish attitude. It may seem obvious, but we can avoid these things by putting the needs and feelings of our spouse above our own. And when we do mess up, we should really be quick to apologize and to forgive.
Forgiveness doesn't always come easily. We tend to focus on our own pain and not our own guilt. But as God convicts our hearts to repentance, we should remember his abundant grace to us and follow his words and example. We hope you've enjoyed this episode on forgiveness. Please leave us a comment and tell us what you think. We really enjoy the interaction with all of you.
And did you know that anytime you like, subscribe, comment, or share any of our content, it helps us a lot? It actually does. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for listening and watching. And remember that marriage isn't always easy. In fact, it can be pretty difficult sometimes. But if you focus on how much you love each other, you really can get through anything together.